Yes, a very good morning to you. It's Monday, the 12th of October, 2020. My name is Pete Fairbairn. Welcome back to the best on ground weekday kickoff, wherever you're watching or listening to the show. Great to have your company. And as always, I'm joined by one of the country's preeminent sporting journos. And after an absolutely epic Bledisloe Cup clash yesterday, the first time we've seen the Wallabies in action for nigh on 12 months, it was thoroughly appropriate that we get the man with his finger on the pulse, Christy Doran from rugby.com.au, to join us on the show this morning. How are you, Seedors?
Hey, excited because there's just a new dawn. It's springtime. Isn't it brilliant when the Wallabies are back producing performances like they did yesterday?
Mate, I love the positivity, and absolutely what a contest it was yesterday. For those who didn't watch it, firstly, shame on you, but secondly, 16 all the score there. We had about 6 or 7 minutes beyond the 80 as both teams took turns trying to somehow find either a mistake in the opposition or perhaps an infringement and get a penalty goal. There was a possibility of a drop goal attempt for the Wallabies. James O'Connor was waiting in the pocket, but it didn't come out. But in general, what we saw was two teams with new coaches, plenty of fresh blood, different looking teams than what we saw last time they both played at the Rugby World Cup. We saw a pretty attritional 80 minutes. We saw ebbs and flows, and we saw a contest that, as Wayne Smith tells us in The Australian, really delivered, and rarely does a sporting contest deliver quite like Bledisloe 1 did in Wellington. Christy, talk us through the context of where the game's currently sitting and how important that contest was in the broader scheme of Australian rugby.
I don't think there was a single outsider who doesn't follow rugby extremely closely that would have given the Wallabies a chance. Not even people that follow the game closely would have given the Wallabies a chance, really. They've got a brand new coach who's just come in, who's picking the Wallabies up off 7th in the world rugby rankings. Rugby in Australia doesn't have a broadcast deal just yet. They've been through hell and back in recent years with Israel Folau. This was one of the most outstanding results in rugby, Australian rugby history in this century, I think, really, since dating back to the early 2000s when we had the British and Irish Lions out here and you win that series. This was monumentous because it's a very young side, only 2 survivors from the starting 15 from last year's World Cup quarterfinal exit. A brand new coach from New Zealand, just the second time that a foreigner has coached the Wallabies. So there's always going to be an added sense of focus and heightened sense of focus on a bloke who's just come across from the ditch, and in Dave Rennie's case has come down from Glasgow in Scotland. Huge in the context of rugby in this country, and it's really, I think, heading into this second test, it will have captured an audience which wouldn't have been there had they not produced a 16-16 draw. And the Wallabies easily could have won that match at the end there. They put themselves in the position, and if you read the media coming out of New Zealand, well, they are counting their lucky stars, because the Wallabies produced a performance which has signalled a lot of intent and the direction that they'll go under Dave Rennie.
You would have had the opportunity to speak to Wallabies players and the coach himself after the match yesterday. How was it sitting with them? Were they pleased to get the draw? I mean, what it means now is that we've got one more match across the ditch in Auckland this weekend, and then 2 matches in Sydney. In Australia, one in Sydney, one in Brisbane. Australia will need to win 2 of those to win the Bledisloe Cup back for the first time in 18 years. Are the players and Rennie pretty happy with the achievement?
I got the sense that they're not, because it's been 2002 was the last time that the Wallabies won the Bledisloe Cup, and I think they understand now that coming close, winning one game a series, it's not good enough. They won one game last year in the series, and they still didn't win the Bledisloe Cup. So until they do lift that cup, I don't think there's going to be any celebrations, and that's exactly what Dave Rennie said in his post-match press conference straight after full time. Said, we're disappointed. We had opportunities. It was an opportunity missed, that he said. So there was no celebrations in the change room. Yes, you've got to pay credit and look at some of the outstanding contributions and performances from particularly a few of the debutants. But there were no celebrations, and James O'Connor said that and told a few of us Australian reporters that a couple of hours after the game when they'd gone back to the team hotel.
Yeah, and we'll get to those players in just a moment. I'll just read this from Wayne Smith in The Australian. In the final analysis, Australia still hasn't broken its 19-year losing streak on New Zealand soil, and Rennie's win record as Wallabies coach still stands at an implacable 0. That is the cruel and unforgiving nature of a draw. It effectively counts as a loss for the team and the coach, and that's pretty much how the Wallabies were viewing it. Our second story, as I say, we're looking a little bit more deeply at the performances of the players. There were 3 Wallaby debutants yesterday in Filippo Daugunu, Hunter Paisami and Harry Wilson, the Queensland Reds trio. So looking at your player ratings for rugby.com.au, you've given Daugunu a perfect 10. Talk us through his game and his performances, but more broadly, the debutants and some of the other individual performances which stood out to you yesterday.
Well, player ratings is something that the players themselves hate. The media themselves hate having to do it, but the punters love it and lap it up. It's not something that you enjoy doing. But I generally take the approach of having to watch a replay because you're always caught in the moment at the time when you're doing your match report or your breakout story. So I always watch it a second time. Filippo Daugunu, on debut, the right winger, had played on the left wing all year for the Queensland Reds, was simply outstanding. He was a bloke who had a shocking Super Rugby AU final, got yellow carded, gave away a number of penalties. He was a bit hot-headed. And his selection actually summed up the attacking mindset that Dave Rennie went into this match with, where they were going to push the limits in the outside channels and up front, and they were going to have a conservative, reliable, composed playmaking channels with Nick White, James O'Connor and Matt Tamua at 9, 10 and 12. Daugunu was electric out wide, scored a try, got on the ball. He couldn't have played a better game. Nick White proved a lot of doubters wrong. A guy, Tate McDermott, who wasn't even in the 23. A lot of people think that the Queensland Reds 9 should have started, but White played a brilliant mix of kicking, putting the ball up in the windy Wellington skies, and it caused absolute havoc for the New Zealand back 3. He probed, he was excellent. There was hardly a player out there that struggled, and that was the most impressive thing, that it was a really combined effort. And Dave Rennie's always spoken about culture, and his teams have always spoken about culture, and it looked like a side that all played for one another, that had the internal confidence and belief that they could produce a performance that many people didn't think that they could.
Just really quickly, Hunter Paisami and Harry Wilson, how did you see their debuts?
Wilson just continued to pick up where he left off with the Reds, was strong with the ball, dented the line, often was from a standing start, but early on he played with a bit of width in the outside channels. Paisami was probably one of the unheralded stars, because this is a guy who'd been basically left out, dumped from the Rebels after an indiscretion, but also they didn't think he was big enough. Comes to the Reds, and after a year of a couple of weeks sleeping on his player agent's office, gets picked up by the Reds a year later and has made every post to winner since. He was brilliant. Whether or not Jordan Bataille comes in, I think he probably does come in at outside centre if he's fit, or at the very least off the bench, and he allows the option of playing on the wing as well, Jordan Bataille, if he does come in off the bench as well.
Yeah, I think the 60-metre plus penalty attempt from Reece Hodge, which agonisingly hit the post, probably shows the value of making sure you keep him in that 23 jersey for the match at Eden Park. What a cracker that will be. Speaking of cracking matches, let's turn our attention now to another code, and that's the AFL. We saw 2 relatively one-sided semi-finals over the weekend, with Richmond dismantling St Kilda, and then Geelong really embarrassing Collingwood, keeping them to 1 goal until three-quarter time, and eventually winning that one by 68 points. What it means is that the teams that we thought would be in the final 4 places in the AFL are the teams that are there. Richmond will play against Port Adelaide at the Adelaide Oval, while Geelong and Brisbane will take each other on at the Gabba on Saturday. It's the preliminary final, new boys, in Brisbane against a side that's been there more than anyone since 2007, Anthony Colangello tells us in The Age. While that lack of experience for the Lions might seem ominous, the circumstances of this match render that factor a moot point. Of course, the amazing season that we've had, Christy, with teams in hub environments and the majority of matches played up here in Queensland, well, they kind of, I guess the stars have aligned perfectly with the Brisbane Lions in their development. That there's an AFL Grand Final being held for the first ever time at the Gabba. The Lions just need to win one more to get there against the Cats, and a Cats team who've struggled to get beyond this point in recent seasons as well. Since 2011, they haven't made it past the preliminary final despite being regularly involved in them. How do you see this one playing out? Are the stars all aligning perfectly for the Brisbane Lions to go the whole way, or do they need to be really conscious and cautious of a Cats team that's chock-a-block full of genuine superstars of the game?
I'm going to just make a slight analogy here. At the start of the year, speaking to a former Rugby World Cup winner with the Wallabies, I won't name who it was, but he made mention that it was not only just a new dawn, it represented a new period in Australian rugby, but we'd got rid of a lot of losers. And that sounds really harsh, but at the end of the day, these guys had never won big matches, big test matches, and hadn't really won any silverware either. Maybe at provincial level, but not at test rugby. The same comparison could be made, really, with Geelong. We know a couple of them won a premiership early on in Chris Scott's tenure, but a lot of them have also lost a lot of finals and have a lot of baggage going into another preliminary final. You contrast that with the Brisbane Lions, a young side that has got a lot of talent coming through, no more so than Cameron. The Lions have had a perfect dream run leading up to this. Let's be honest. The fact that they can stay in their state at the Gabba for the majority of the year is extraordinary. And it really, if they can manage to get into the final, host a final, win the final, it sets them up spectacularly well for creating a bit of a dynasty themselves by just getting the monkey off the back. Yes, they have to get past Geelong this weekend, a side that smashed them earlier in the year at the SCG. The Lions came out hard early, but just get absolutely pantsed in the third quarter at the SCG by Geelong, who just ran hot. So it won't be easy for Brisbane. Chris Scott, a former Brisbane Lions player himself, who won titles there in 01, 2 and 3. It's going to be a cracking game. As I say, a young side against an experienced head, but how much baggage? That's the big question.
Yeah, I'm a believer. I'm converted when it comes to the Brisbane Lions. I didn't think that they could beat Richmond in that first qualifying final. Richmond had beaten them 15 times in a row before that match, and of course have won 2 of the last 3 premierships. But the manner in which they were able to win that game has got me convinced. I think they'll beat Geelong. Richmond, Port Adelaide, that's a real flip of the coin for me. I can't get my head around that one yet either. And maybe the home ground advantage will make a big difference for the power there as well. But that's going to be a cracking contest. From the AFL to the NRL and 2 cracking prelims in the NRL as well. We'll see the Melbourne Storm take on the Canberra Raiders, who knocked out the 2-time defending champion Roosters and got a little bit of revenge for last year's grand final defeat on the weekend. And then the South Sydney Rabbitohs, who had to come from behind to beat Parramatta. They don't mind giving teams a head start, the Rabbitohs, but they'll face off against a Penrith Panthers team who haven't tasted defeat in many a month. And that's the angle for our story today. Michael Chammas, going back in the Sydney Morning Herald and having a look at a little bit of history at the decision to replace Anthony Griffin as Panthers head coach in 2018. Of course, they played finals that year. When Griffin was sacked, I think they were 4th on the table. And the choice of who to bring in as head coach appeared to be a straight shootout between Ivan Cleary, who'd been there before and had obviously hadn't left in great circumstances and was contracted at the West Tigers, or the alternative being the super coach in Wayne Bennett, who was contracted in Brisbane at the time, but it appeared, pretty obvious to all that Bennett's tenure at the Broncos was drawing towards a close. Of course, now we know Bennett's at the Rabbitohs, and it was Ivan Cleary who jumped off the bus at the Tigers and headed over to the Panthers. But Chammas, looking back at history and the fact that it was Gus Gould who was pushing for Bennett to be the man to come in at the Panthers, but the whole board were united in their belief that Ivan Cleary was the man, that he understood the club and its DNA. clearly, speaking of DNA, his son Nathan is the star player at the Panthers, and they thought that bringing Ivan back was a great way to keep Nathan there and also to extract his full potential. Wayne Bennett's going to be licking his lips at a chance to show Penrith what they missed this weekend, Christy. Are the Bunnies a genuine chance to knock off the Panthers? I think all the pressure's on Penrith here, isn't it?
Yeah, all the pressure is on Penrith. They haven't lost in an eternity. What is it? 17 games now, unbeaten. It's proven to be an inspired decision to get Ivan Cleary, but as sport, and we touched upon this last week with Chris Scott, who has that outstanding winning percentage record of 70% in the AFL. Unless you win titles, unless you win premierships, people forget who you are. And people start questioning how good a coach you are unless you can win the big dance. Yeah, it's a huge game. Penrith, though, and like the Brisbane Lions, are coming off a week off. And you can't understate how important it is to be fresh going into a game like this. Souths are probably running on adrenaline. They've still got the name, the Rabbitohs name, the Burgess name right throughout all the headlines at the moment still. There's a lot of pressure on Souths. Whether or not the momentum, they can continue to take that forward for a couple of weeks and run on adrenaline. That's a big thing, and it's hard to do that, to build up, to have 4 back-to-back finals games in a row. Souths have played very well recently, two big wins, but I think Penrith, they've got Ivan Cleary, they've got Nathan Cleary, who's the star halfback at the moment, who's just running the rule. He's the best player in the game almost at the moment, Nathan Cleary. But as we all know, it all comes down to titles. He does have that state of origin experience from last year, which will help him immensely. I'm backing Penrith, and I love the quote from the board member in there where he said, "What does Wayne Bennett really know about Penrith?" And that's ultimately what sealed Cleary getting the job there.
Yeah, I think Penrith got obviously tested their finals experience when the Roosters shot out to an early 2-try lead in week 1 of the finals, and the way in which the Panthers were able to respond to that was remarkable, and it's pretty hard to bet against them from this point moving forward. Our final story today takes us to Roland Garros in France, where Rafael Nadal has beaten Novak Djokovic to win his 13th Roland Garros title. Straight sets win for Nadal, which takes him equal to Roger Federer's record of 20 Grand Slam men's titles, and leaves Djokovic stranded on 17. 6-love, 6-2, 7-5. Nadal just completely outplaying Djokovic, which is pretty remarkable when you realise that Djokovic hadn't lost a completed match at all in 2020. Nadal didn't play the US Open, just eased into it ahead of his favourite surface here on clay. And we've only got a couple of minutes here, Christy, but I want to ask more broadly, is there any athlete on the planet, current or retired, who has a stronger tie to a single stadium or venue than what we see with Nadal and Roland Garros?
I don't think so. I don't think there is. Maybe David Warner, the opening batsman for Australia, on any Australian flat deck. But even as from a team perspective, the only side that I can think of at the moment that has really an unrivaled, unmatched record is the All Blacks at Eden Park, who haven't lost at their main venue since 1994, and the Wallabies haven't won there against the All Blacks since 86, I think it is. So, no, I don't think so. It's extraordinary what Rafa Nadal manages to do. He played in a couple of the warm-up tournaments to try to get himself ready after what has been a very disrupted 2020 for tennis players, for sports, men and women all around the world. I don't think there is. Can you think of anyone, Pete?
No, none off the top of my head. It's remarkable. He grows an extra leg when he steps onto that, Philippe Chartier, I think it is, the centre court there in Paris. And it's a cauldron of noise and excitement, generally obviously affected by COVID this year. But, it's just a remarkable achievement. And I feel like, and I've said it before on this show, we're going to look back in years to come and just marvel at the fact that we got to see Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, all at the very, very top of the sport for so long.
Yeah, and I wonder whether or not as impressive as it is, 13 titles at Roland Garros, whether or not when those three players, those three incredible players eventually do retire, whether or not the fact that Rafa won 13 of his titles at Roland Garros goes against him or with him, because obviously the others might have shared the experience around at the other courts, the hard courts, the grass courts. So yeah, that'll be an interesting discussion. Is does 13 on one court go against you or with you? It probably goes with you, given that the clay is just completely different, and he's also won Wimbledon's and Aussie Opens before too.
Yeah, and we probably are starting to lean towards the likelihood that Federer may not win another Grand Slam. He's 37, his body's starting to let him down. He didn't play in the French. Rafa, on the other hand, you could see him winning the French Open for another 2-3 years. And if he could sneak one, on hard court somewhere as well, all of a sudden he gets into that 24-25 category of Grand Slam wins, and that makes it pretty tough for Novak to reach him before he comes to the end of his career. Christy, great to catch up with you this morning. As always, a real pleasure speaking to you after some rugby's been played as well, and after a pretty outstanding performance from the Wallabies. But let's take a leaf out of Dave Rennie's book and not celebrate the draw too hard, because there's a big test to come at Eden Park this week, and look forward to catching up with you again next week to review that one.
Thanks, Pete. Always good to join.
And always good to lock you in for a Monday morning early call live on the show so that you can't back out. We'll look forward to catching up with Christy again next week. We'll see you again tomorrow, though, with all the latest news and all the latest action making waves in the world of Australian sport. Have a great day. Cheers.